Hi, this is terrific. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Theater Lab for this evening's Millennium stage, brought to you by Target and the Marriott Foundation. As a courtesy to tonight's performers and other audience members, please take a moment to turn off all mobile devices. Photography and recording of any kind during the performance is prohibited. Millennium Stage presents a free performance at 6 p.m. 365 days a year. All of our performances are broadcast live and available on demand at www.kennedy-center.org. And now it's my pleasure. Please join me in welcoming the Kennedy Center President, Deborah Rutter.
Thank you, David. Good evening. I am really pleased to welcome you here to be a part of this event. There is a citywide festival going on, I'm sure you've all heard, and this panel this evening is a discussion, and I'm intrigued by the title, so we're going to learn a lot tonight, I think. All Women's Voices, a conversation about intentionality and inclusion. So I'm really fascinated by this. So I hope you've all heard that there is this citywide celebration highlighting the scope of new plays written by women. In a 6-week period, in these 2 months, we are coming together to support women theater makers by producing a new work by a female playwright or hosting a special event or workshop. So we here at the Kennedy Center are delighted to be doing quite a lot of that. This is a groundbreaking festival. This panel is a very important part of all of the events that we're doing. Here at the Kennedy Center, we have 7 additional performances and events during these 6 weeks. 2 free readings, 4 free Millennium stage performances, and 1 full-scale world premiere production for children and their families called Darius and Twig. That'll be at the Family Theater, and really a special experience. It's especially important to me here at the Kennedy Center to be a part of this incredible festival. The performing arts provide a ways of telling stories, and in many diverse ways, through music, dance, theater, opera. And it is through these stories that we find ways to understand our world, what it means to us, what it is like to live in it, the things that we think about, the things that we feel, the things that we dream about for ourselves. Tonight we have 7 accomplished and multi-talented artists with us. They are playwrights, performers, actors, directors, producers, filmmakers, educators, administrators. I think that's more than 7, so you must have multiple talents here. We are here to have them talk with one another and also with us about what we do and to be inclusive and ways in which we can make possible the work that takes place. Since our discussion tonight is about the performing arts, I feel it's very fitting for us to start with a performer. I'm pleased now to introduce actor. She's one of the multi-talented actor, dancer, writer, choreographer. Please welcome Paige Henderson.
Hi, everybody. Good evening. How are you? It's good to see everyone here. And I'm delighted to kick off tonight's panel with an excerpt from Page in Full of B-Girl's visual mixtape. This is my autobiographical one-woman show. And this piece that you're about to see was inspired by the Fly Girls. The Fly Girls were a group of beautiful, multicultural, independent, and confident women who just happened to dance in between comedy sketches on In Living Color in the 1990s. But for me, they are my idols, and they represent everything that I want myself and my company, B-Fly Entertainment, to be a part of and to inspire. So here goes. Fly girl, oh so fly girl. Girl, I'm fly. Fly girl, fly. You can't see me. Covered in my attitude, so sexy, I'm rude, so bad, I'm good, so suburb, so hood, but it's all good, 'cause I'm fly, no lie, and you know this. Ballin', fallin', sprawlin' all over that beat, can't nothing stop my feet in my brand new felines, or should I say, fee-flies. Fee, fi, fo, fum, bring your djembe or your beat machine drum, and I will break circles all around it and then bury it in my 1986 time capsule. So dirty that there's flies because they swarm in my honor. Bzz, bzz, they ponder as they rub their feet together. Who is the most clever, the opposite of a flower on the wall? Ah, yes, the fly girl Paige, B-girling all over this stage, proving once and for all, who's the flyest of them all? Girl, I'm fly. Fly, girl, fly. Fly till I die. Oh, so fly. Lorianne Gibson, clap along. Masako Willis, Carrie Ananaba, Lisa Marie Todd, Carrie French, Deirdre Lang, Jennifer Lopez, Michelle Whitney Morrison, Carla Garrido, Lisa Thompson, Josie Thacker, Regina King, Uzo Aduba, Viola Davis, Paige Hernandez, the original Fly Girls. And the crowd goes wild. Thank you. Thank you very much. And now, it is my distinct honor and pleasure, I love this woman so much, to introduce to you a playwright, director, professor, and many other things, Caleen Sinnette Jennings. Woo-hoo!
Good evening. I'd like to share with you a piece that I wrote in response to some troubling things that have been happening in our country. And it's a piece that I call Hands Up. To African goddesses, I sang my respect. I danced head high with body erect. To the beat of dark feet on the red earth of my youth, I danced my freedom, my love, and my truth. My hands swept and my hands gathered, harvesting what grew and mattered. Hands that clapped and hands that pounded. Hands over my ears as the rifles sounded. Hands up, we surrendered, or we felt the whip's pain. Hands up, we surrendered, thrown together, hands chained. We resisted enslavement, and oh, how we strived to break the chains, to run, to keep ourselves alive. Hands hid my nakedness on the auction block. Hands crossed and tied above my head for punishment. Hands pricked and toughened by picking cotton. Hands that nursed and cradled and soothed my master's children. Hands that stitched freedom quilts and hung them high on the clothesline. I was not content in servitude. Hands that held Harriet Tubman's rifle. Hands that penned Phyllis Wheatley's verses. Hands that ran Ida B. Wells' printing press. Hands that sassed up the Charleston, pounded gospel, and tickle boogie woogie on piano's keys. Hands that typed Zora Neale's manuscripts, maids' hands, bruised and stiff with pain. Hands that flew Bessie Coleman's plane. Angela Davis's hand in clenched fist held high. Fannie Lou Hamer's hand that pointed out the lie. Mae Jemison's hand on a spaceship's control. Beyonce's hand waving, demanding her band of gold. If you liked it, then you should have put a ring on it. Michelle Obama's hand in fist bump and high five. Hallelujah, we said, these hands show we have arrived. Our post-racial hands laid there idle, sans care. Soft, manicured hands stroked our long, store-bought hair. Our hands held our iPhones, sent emails and texts. So our hands went aflutter by what happened next. When an empty-handed brown boy with his hands in the air was shot dead in the street and just left to lie there. And we've all been caught red-handed with our hands in the cookie jar, safe in our brick houses, slick in our smart cars, drunk on the illusion that we've come so very far. We've been blinded by trinkets and drugged by the lies. Now an unarmed kid's shot and we're stunned and surprised. Now an unarmed kid's shot and every one of us dies. Should we fight? Should we cower? Take a stand or just run? Now our hands feel so naked without a knife or a gun or mace or a Molotov or a taser to stun. Because after 400 years, we're back at square one. Because these hands we thought filled with our fine victories, now palms turned out above us beg, please don't shoot us, please. For the justice we lack, is it defense or attack to chant, fists up, fight back, fists up, fight back? It's all in our hands. All we can and cannot handle. It's all in our hands. What to do with our hands. Thank you. Thank you. And it is my great pleasure to turn the discussion and the evening over to a consummate artist. She is a playwright, director, artistic director, actor, activist, Jennifer Nelson.
This is them. So you're going to meet, whoops, something just fell down. What was that?
I think you're okay.
Okay. You'll meet the panelists individually as we go along, and the bios are in your programs, so I'm not going to give you their extensive backgrounds. You can read it for yourself or have somebody read it to you. But I thought I would open this conversation up with a couple of quotes from women who have been in the news, in the performing arts news in the relatively recent past. First, I found this, well, this I wrote at first. When you hear the word woman, who first comes to mind? What does she look like? What does her family look like? Where is she from? Where does she live? Who does she love? What's important to her? What worries her? How often do you hear her story? And has she ever been asked to tell it? And this is a lovely piece I found of Lisa Crone, who this year was the first woman to ever win the Tony Award for most outstanding as the most outstanding playwright. Unconscious bias exists because we are shown the same narrow view of humanity again and again and again. As storytellers, we have a profound power in our hands. We are peopling the imaginations of our neighbors. When our seasons center the world on the same people who have always been center stage, then we are complicit in the larger cultural message that those people are more important, interesting, and complex. But if we take full advantage of the abundance of gifted writers right in front of us, the unprecedented range and diversity of playwrights working today, we have the power to reshape those narratives. We can help create a generation primed to view the people around them as they actually exist in all their complications and potential and in all their humanity. And then lastly, I'm borrowing from, if you watched the Emmys last night, this wonderful quote that was, the only thing that separates women of color from anyone else is opportunity. And I think that would be true of all artists of color, since this is the subject of our panel is a little broader than not only the theater artists. The only thing that separates the artists of color from other artists is opportunity. So, having said that, I think what we'll do is let each of the people on the panel give a little statement. First of all, if you want to respond to something that I read, or if you have something prepared that you would like to bring up that's related to your work, your specific work, or your history of your specific work. As I said, you introduce yourself, and then their bios are in your program if you want to know more about who each individual speaker is. So, who would like to go first? Thembi Duncan.
Yes. Hi. I'm Thembi Duncan. I'm the Creative Programs Director at Young Playwrights Theater. And I have such a strong relationship and history really with everyone on this stage and in DC Theater. And it makes me so very proud to be here and be among these people who have made such a difference in this work. For me, a statement that I would make is just that we have to remember that art is not just the person that you see on the stage. Art involves many, many people who work very hard to get audiences into the building, to sell tickets, to create sets, to publicize performances and things like that, and also to make the decisions of what the art is going to be that's presented. And all of those tables, when people sit down and have conversations, have to be diverse. It's not enough to just say, oh, we'll do a diverse production. The staffs of theaters and artistic organizations need to be diverse. And I feel like that's something that we're seeing start to develop now with arts management programs and people realizing that people of color have to be at the table from the top down in order to really make a difference and to create inclusion. And until that happens, we're not going to see the level of inclusion that we need. And that's about physical ability, that's about color, that's about gender, that's about everything.
Yes. Although I would add, I agree, I would add that, in fact, there are more women working behind the stage, behind the scenes in theaters than the ones that you see getting credit for what happens on the stage. That, you know, that there are, that the bulk, I don't remember the statistic, but the bulk of plays that are produced in this country, it's something like 60-40% or 70-30%, that most of the playwrights are written by, most of the plays are written by male playwrights, and then there's the significantly smaller proportion of those plays that are written by women. And that's a big question for me too, is like, as we get more women who are sitting in the actual artistic director seat or the producer seat, are they in fact themselves still playing in the paradigm, the existing paradigm of choosing plays that are primarily by men? And, you know, what are the kind of influences that we need to have on the theater community to see that we get a little bit more equity in terms of what shows up in front of the public? So, that's, anybody else? An opening statement?
I'm Caleen Jennings, and I guess the thing that's very interesting to me at age 65, having come of age during what was then called the Women's Lib movement, is to be able to handle the paradox in terms of gender, the paradox that we are the same and we are different. We are the same in terms of our intellectual capabilities. We have often proven the same in terms of our physical strength, in terms of our physical abilities, yet we are different. So I think being able to hold those two things in your hand at the same time is important. I think the way we shape our stories, the kind of stories we tell, they are different. And I think, as Lisa said, to cut that out of a national narrative, we're doing ourselves a grave disservice. So I hope and I think this festival is a way to say, look at the wealth that has been excluded, and from this point forward, let's look at broadening our perspectives and making sure that everyone is represented. And I hope this is a strong first step in the nation's capital to sort of lead the way in the rest of the country.
Thank you.
Okay, hello, let me start again. I'm Michelle Banks. And when you mention this perspective, when we see a woman, who is she? And especially in the hearing community, who is she? What is she? Now, obviously, I'm a deaf woman. So I see myself as black, deaf, and a woman. So there are 3 levels. So in this perspective, as a black woman, there's that world. So people talk about white privilege, but for me as a black deaf woman, what kind of opportunities, what type of privileges do I have? So I really have to kind of bare my soul, become more aggressive, and really share my story. But who am I sharing it with? And those are the decisions that I had to make, how to share my story to the world and see that we do share the same issues. All women kind of share the same issues. We share issues of abuse, rape. So I feel that my story, when I share it, I feel that people may look down on it, see that me as a deaf woman may not be on the same level, but still have the potential and have the ability to do anything except hear. I can drive, I can perform, I can do all of these things. And so that when I educate people about this, then people understand what we're all about. They understand our language, ASL, how we communicate. So I feel my experience really addresses all of these issues through performance.
Anu.
Yeah. I was just thinking about how women hold up the value of labor and the extent to which the work that women do in the world, or work that's traditionally been in the area of what women do around historically, child rearing, taking care of various things, nursing, all these areas are unpaid or underpaid, and how our minds get trivialized or belittled, and how that's very much a part of what, the unconscious bias. I remember being in a group one time. I was in a theater setting. We were at a workshop, and there was a problem we needed to solve. And so we were kind of wrestling, what is this issue? How do we resolve this question? And so I remember saying something, and I said, well, what if we do this? And the whole room kind of stopped for a minute, considered, and then moved on. And I thought, okay, well, I guess it wasn't really. And then like 3 seconds later, this white man, dear man, I love him, he's really wonderful, but he said the exact same thing that I said, actually the same words, too. And it was really interesting how people could suddenly hear it. And I guess I think of the area of theater and how many women and girls have been in the arts, and when it comes to a point where it's like the paid world, how that you don't really see that parity or that representation of the interests, or who's actually doing the work, as far as who's paid and who's in leadership positions. So yeah, I don't know, I guess I was just thinking about that as you said that, is just women taking up nearly half the world, doing, 80%, there's some statistic of 80% of the world's work, and getting paid like about 20% or maybe less, and like 1% or something of the world's property are owned by women. So I think a lot about that as far as the kind of stories that I tell, and I think about my mom and where the work that she did and how much she had to hold up. And it just reminds me of the stories that are personal to me and what I want to encourage as far as the stories that other people have to tell as well.
And you may notice we have one person who's not a woman on the panel. Would you like to speak?
Yeah, absolutely. My name is Schwartz. I'm the Associate Artistic Director at Theater Alliance, which is a small to mid-size theater company here in Washington, D.C. We produce out of the Anacostia Playhouse, and if I grew up in D.C., and I think whether you grew up in D.C. or not, you have certain associations with Anacostia, and I think the strongest one is that it is, and has been for many generations, it is a historically black community. And we find ourselves in an interesting position of being a company, there are 5 of us on staff. The 4 of us who are part to full-time, we are all people with white skin. And we try to produce as diverse a season as we can, and also a season that will hopefully bring people from the community in so that we feel like they believe that their stories are valuable, that they are represented in an 110-seat theater right there in their neighborhood, and that art is for them, can be for them. It's not something that you have to cross the river to attend, which I think has been the association with the theater for a long time for a community that has been deprived for a whole host of reasons of the performing arts and of the arts in general in their, right there in their backyard. And for us as white people, as people who walk around with privilege, how do we, trying to make an effort to do that theater in the right way and bringing in other artists to direct, to work creatively on those pieces when the leadership of the company is white and we're producing this season Black Nativity for colored girls who have considered suicide when the rainbow is enough, and Word Becomes Flesh, which are all pieces that will have casts that are completely not white, and making sure that we do so in a way that allows those creative perspectives freedom and the ability to create work unbridled, and trying to stay aware of the fact of how we program and what our natural biases might be, and how we can hopefully marry the two as we go forward.
Great. Whoa.
No pressure.
Am I hot or am I hot? So I am Paige Hernandez. I'm a performing artist and proud to say that I am the founder of B-Fly Entertainment, which is elevated art for the hip-hop generation. I'm proud to say that on this night in particular because I set out to make my own company for these same very reasons: a lack of inclusion, a lack of opportunity. You know, I just wasn't getting the mortgage paid. And I wasn't being cast, and those opportunities weren't present. So I set out to create my own material. And essentially, I aimed to create what I wanted to see on stage, which meant a lot of what the panelists have already spoken to. That idea of inclusion, that intentionality, that diversity, all wrapped up into one. I think I am still on a high from last night's Emmys. Did you all watch the Emmys last night? There were an unprecedented 3 wins by African-American women, and this is the first time in 67 years. When you think about an award that's been around that long, and this is the first time that happened, it's mind-boggling and blowing. And then this was the very first time that Viola Davis took home Best Lead Actress. And in her speech that Jennifer quoted, she said something, or she mentioned, how am I to win maybe I should read her actual quote.
I only have the part of it. Here it is. In my mind, I see a line, and that was the quote. That's the Harry Tubman. It's just the only thing that separates women of color. I didn't bring the whole
It basically says,
speech.
How am I to win an Emmy if
yeah.
the role isn't there?
Yeah.
So my chances are already narrow, are already slim, because the opportunity isn't there.
Right.
So I just wanted to set out to create my own opportunities. And then in doing such, give back, not just to the community, but also to those who aspire to continue where we left off. No one should have to reinvent the wheel. And so that happens by making sure that it is a circle, that it is this cycle, that if I have something successful going on, that I can then produce shows that serve as a platform for other artists, which is something that I've been striving to do. So last night meant a lot to me. Each of these panelists mean a lot to me because they've all been kind of a part of that entire spectrum of just making sure that women's voices are heard, but also diverse voices, inclusion, intentionality, all of those things are present in the art that we do every day.
Thank you. wanted to add, or just to remind us all, that in fact there are a number of women who are in positions of power in the cultural arts now. There's no parity, but there certainly are a number of very powerful women who are running theaters or running museums, dance companies, etc. And yet they are not necessarily being as groundbreaking in their casting and hiring as one might have thought they would be when they first took those positions. And so, so I think that's again, this part of this conundrum that we're in, in ourselves, women ourselves have this unconscious bias about men's stories being more important, and about men needing to be seen in roles where they're in charge. In the African American community, we have a whole lot of issues around not wanting to show African American men be abusive to their wives or their women or their children. We want to show positive images. Of course we want to show positive images, but that also means that the woman on the other side of that picture, if it's a story about a husband who's abusive, for example, then you're also showing the woman always as the victim, and so we have a long way to go in terms of recalibrating our entire concepts of gender across gender lines. It's we can't blame men for the problem. We're here. We're part of it. Why do we stand for things that that don't work for us? And then how do we in ways play into it, and without fighting against it? There's I can't remember, Lynn Meadow, I think it is, who is the artistic director of a major theater in New York. I can't think of the name right now. One of the big, not Broadway theaters, but a really big institutional.
Manhattan Theater Club?
Mm-hmm.
Manhattan Theater Club.
Yes, Theater Club. She's been the head of this theater for several years. She announced her season. It's like 7 plays, and they are all by men. And people were kind of stunned. The theater community is kind of stunned because we're in this year where everybody's trying very hard to kind of celebrate, women theater workers, in this particular theater. And yet here is a woman, one of the most powerful women in American theater, who makes a season selection and doesn't include a female playwright in it. She took a lot of grief about it, and then eventually I think she swapped one play out, so it's 6 plays by men and 1 by a woman.
I think that goes back to the point that Thembi made, that it starts with, making sure inclusion is at the very top and a part of these organizations. And sometimes we have women or
She's
people
the head of the
color,
organization.
right, who are at the lead of this, but then they're at the table, with their staff. And if their staff doesn't reflect what she does, she can totally get outvoted. Or, I don't know. I don't know how her situation played, but I'm curious if her staff at all has,
Right.
Well, beyond
my experience, I've worked in a lot of theaters from little to small, that the artistic directors
can still have the final.
Makes the choice, the artistic choices. And if people, when other staff people bring controversy to it, it may be more about budget. That's cast is too big. We can't do a show with a cast of 100 people. We can't do it because it's by a band.
Wow.
So it may be the case in some places, or maybe if there are small theaters where they work more as a collective, and then the artistic directors, decisions may be more directly influenced by staff, but I don't think that's the norm.
I wonder as well, though, that how many of the decisions that we make in positions of artistic leadership are based on the need to make money, and trying to anticipate what we think will bring audiences in and how we can create real revenue and not always be subsisting in the nonprofit theater model off of grants and hoping to get a $5,000 grant that will pay for one actor to be in a show, and how competitive it is for us in the nonprofit world to get those resources, and the question of, well, what stories do we think will sell, and perhaps recalibrating who we're marketing to and who like which audiences have not had their stories told, and perhaps reaching out to them and saying, this is a story that will relate to you. Hopefully you come see it. I mean, there's no guarantee, obviously, that doing a story about black women will bring black women to the theater, or that a story about white men will bring white men. I mean, that it is very much an unknowable
Parentheses,
thing.
a play about black women will bring black women to the theater. Maybe not in other categories, I don't know.
Sure.
But
I think I would like to add to that when we talk about, just sort of riffing off of this idea of where people of diverse perspectives sit in a room, there is no guarantee that as a woman you're going to necessarily do what's best for women, or that that's the complexity. I mean, it speaks right to what Caleen was saying, and what many of us were saying, is that being in a woman's body doesn't guarantee that I'm going to have the sensibilities that you might associate with femininity or womanhood. But I think that the more that if there are 10 of one sort of similar viewpoint and one of another, it's going to be a lot harder to have a real conversation than it is if you've got all these different viewpoints coming from all these different perspectives, and people are able, even if the final decision lies with that one person, I think there's something that happens in the synergy of an organization, even in the synergy of a classroom, of any sort of gathering, where when all those viewpoints are present, something magical happens. That doesn't happen if we're all in the same room and we all agree with each other. There's not that progress, and there's not that opening of the scope that I think is present when you have varying viewpoints. And so it is. It's like having a woman at the helm doesn't guarantee that the plays are going to address things that people think should be addressed or bring parity, but a variety of perspectives does guarantee that at least the conversation has the potential to be more broad. And I think that's something to strive for. We're so far away. Caleen spoke to the 400 years. We got a long way to go. But I hear conversations happening now that I've never heard in my whole little short life. Yes. And people are using terminology that's so inclusive, and just so it reflects a bigger understanding, and it reflects a willingness to listen. And I think it requires a lot of patience for us to really allow that to play out. And the fact that people can say, no, something's wrong with how you cast this season, or how the season you're producing, and we want to say something about it. And for there to be a response, I think is significant. So
I think on the one hand, theater represents what's going on in the country at large. I mean, people form their opinions and make their assumptions. And there are certain people, if you say our theater's doing an all-woman season, they're going to have a set of assumptions about what kinds of plays they're going to be. Or if you say I'm doing an all-male season, they're going to have a set of assumptions. Or all-black female playwrights, they have a set of assumptions. So breaking down those assumptions, you also have to break down the assumptions that exist in our society. And we realize that they're very hard to change. On the other hand, I think the theater is the place to change them. If you can get people into the theater and they have this incredible experience, and again, Lisa Krohn talked about the fact that I think theater in the classroom are the last two places where you can be live in a room with a group of people who you probably wouldn't associate with otherwise, and who you may vehemently disagree with, but somehow you share an experience. And you may have to sit and listen to opinions that you don't agree with, but you can still respect the playwright who created them. So I think those kinds of very complicated human interactions, people want it simple, they want it fast, they want it easy, and theater doesn't do that. And getting people to take the risk to come out and have the potential to change their minds is earth-shattering. And I'm so excited and happy to be part of this little bit of nudging that's going on right about now, when our political scene is a disaster, with everybody sort of entrenched in their own, theater is still pushing those boundaries just a little bit. So it gives me hope to be a part of this community.
I want to hear from Anu and Michelle, and then we'll open it up to conversation.
I was talking with someone about, we're hearing different people talk about what diversity and inclusion means to them. it can mean very different things. And there are some people that think that diversity is kind of like a charity thing, or that so that we can include you and you can be in the room, or it's a matter of skin color. Like, diversity is so much bigger than that. By opening up the range of, as you say, perspectives and experiences in a room, when you don't have that, I feel like it does cut you off from a piece of your humanity. Because if there are things happening in the world that groups of people are being hurt and are being targeted, we are all hurt by that. We are all affected psychologically. You know, it does a disservice to all of us to not have that. And even the term, if you think of color or minority, you know, if you want to think about it, I mean, we can talk more about a global majority, actually, and see who really is the minority globally. And then how are these stories connecting? I mean, someone once remarked when I performed how he was surprised that the story was so universal to him, because he didn't expect to relate to someone whose story was a young, like, Indian girl. He didn't expect to relate that, and because of that, it became universal. So whose stories get to be called universal, and whose are like, well, only those people will relate? Well, ultimately, we're all human. And I think, like, each of us are containers for the experiences that we have, and the experiences we have are influenced by, you know, how we're seen and the opportunities we have. And, you know, I remember saying this once, that, like, our experiences color our lenses. And if you stack more of those lenses on top of each other, we get to a picture of this larger truth. So theater and storytelling can be a way of bringing different lenses together.
I did want to share one of my experiences that I had. The art director of my company, of the Onyx Theater in New York, I had been with that company for about 11 years. Anyway, it was my company. And I was given an opportunity. This was an opportunity for deaf and hard of hearing actors of color. It was their opportunity to perform on a stage. So my production team had to decide what was the most important message we wanted to get out to the community, and how do we draw people into our shows. We did a survey. We asked different members of different communities, white, black, hearing, deaf, all different people. And what we found was quite interesting. They all wanted to see their own stories. Okay, so how do we tell all of their stories? We can't tell them all at the same time. So we tried to think of other ways to show this range. So we would do like a show from France, brought it here to the United States, but made it apply to the American experience, the human experience that we Americans could truly relate to. I know some plays that have been written by this one deaf woman in particular. I did a show by a deaf woman, a white deaf woman, but she wrote a show about a black family called Laying of Hands, which often happens with deaf community members. They end up being taken to a religious environment and have hands put on them. But I thought, how interesting is it that this deaf white woman was telling the story of these black deaf people? But it was based on her own experiences of which she had seen happening to other people. And so she also sat with members of the black deaf community. And I thought, well, I could do that. And so this particular woman approached me and said that she had a play that she wanted my company to produce. And when I read the script, it was so moving. So when we did that show, everybody, like you said, in all the different communities came, and we had full houses every night, hearing, deaf, black, white. And it was amazing because this show really hit everybody at all these different levels for the audience. And I think that made me not feel satisfied, but feel accomplished that I was able to do something in that manner. And it's something I always have to think about. How do I include diversity? Because I think it is one of the most difficult things.
Thank you. Now, you. Do you want to add to the conversation? Or do you have a question that you would like to hear one or all or some people respond to? Yes, the lovely young woman right there.
It's interesting hearing you all talk and thinking about the nonprofit world where I work, not in theater, but in governance actually, and thinking about how there's a lesser talked about level of organizational structure that we don't often discuss, which is boards and governance, and that is where we are doing a terrible job at diversity across the nonprofit sector. I mean, BoardSource, which is the leading governance expert in our country, does an annual index, and for the 2014 index, they found across the sector, theaters included, that 80% of board members are white, 90% of board chairs are white, and something like 70% of board members are men. So when I think about who's above that woman who selected an entire slate of plays by men, I think about that group of folks. And I'm sure it's the same across the city. I recruit board members for nonprofits. I see that even in the most diverse organizations, it is like a funnel, like a pyramid to the top with only white folks, mostly men at the top. And so part of what I think is the struggle is figuring out how do we use some of the prosperity, particularly in places like DC, where we actually do have a substantive Black and Latino middle class, upper class. How do we figure out how to make theater appeal to those folks who are potential donor base? Because that's where I see the needle moving on what happens on the stage, is getting people who have deep pockets to care about who is at the production level and then what ultimately gets consumed by audiences. And that's where I see the least amount of traction, unfortunately.
I'm sorry, Paige and I have to take off. I have a show opening tonight, part of the festival. So I do apologize that we have to take off. I have so much enjoyed my time with the panel and with you. Sorry.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Lovely to meet you. I just say that I used to, for 11 years, I ran a small theater company here in Washington, and that is so spot on in terms of what the central central issue to be resolved is, that, that to get people who love the arts, who love to go see the art, participate. I mean, they're active participants, but to say, would you be on the board? And sometimes it gets reduced to how much money do I have to give you to be on the board? But sometimes it's not. Sometimes it's just, I don't know if I want to do that. So there's no social currency in all sectors of our community that validates participating on a board. If you could be up front and be the one performing, or if you're going to be the making the choices, or in the rehearsal hall where it's it seems like the fun of things is, then it's easier to recruit people to be part of your organization. But to say, I need you to be on the board, and I didn't know. And it's I don't know how we break that wall down. Well, one idea I have, and then I want to hear what you have to say, because you look like you have something pertinent to say. Well, you look smart. But one thing I think that we need to break is this idea that boards need to be older people. And it's, partly that's because we assume that older people have more access to funds than younger people do. But in fact, I know, like, not theater, what's the theater that's up in Silver Spring now? Forum. They have a young board. I mean, compared to, the boards of unnamed theaters that I've worked in, where, everybody is over a certain age. But their board is very young, and they are really energized. And, they don't just give money, they come and help break the set down, at the end of the run, or they're there to provide, to do, their currency is labor and presence as well as cash. So
I think that's it. I mean, I think that it's helping people understand what it means to be a board member and maybe changing the definition of what that is, at least for people who like you're saying, may feel like, oh, well, I'm not a board member. I'll help, I'll contribute, but no, I don't see myself as a board member. I mean, and that's about visibility, right? I mean, that's in anything. If you don't see people in a certain position, then there's something subconscious that happens that you have to fight against that says, well, I guess I'll have to be the first, as opposed to, oh, look, there are several people who I identify with for whatever reason. It means it's possible for me. And that's something that is important too, is that visibility, so that people say, oh, okay, I can go for this. Mm-hmm.
I think sometimes it can feel so big, and I guess the question I have is, what is it, you're listening to this, you're ruminating, everybody's having their different thoughts about this topic. What is something that leaving this room someone can do that can shift things around diversity and inclusion? That's a question I have. I mean, I don't claim to have all the answers to it. I was curious to know what people are thinking about what's an action, or what is it that you think about what should be done and what can one do?
I mean, I don't know if this is really a direct answer to your question, but it was something that we were chatting about a little bit before the panel got started today. But we just started season planning for ourselves, and we have had one introductory meeting just to talking through ideas and trying to make sure that we are getting a diversity of perspectives in the season planning process. An idea that we've thrown out there is inviting community members in to, and giving them, say, a list of 10 plays, or the 10 plays that we're considering, and asking them, if you have time, read them. We'd love to hear your thoughts. We'd love your responses. And assembling a group of people outside of what can be a very insular theater world to give us their perspectives and to say, this looks like, a very heavily this-themed season. This looks like, there are lots of stories of this or of that. And then hopefully even responding with, I would love it if there were a story about this. And perhaps, I say all of this just to make the point that maybe we need to be rethinking how we program and what perspectives we are allowing into the room, and opening it up like as broadly as we can and changing the way that things are done. And it's going to involve a lot of trial and error, and it might not work, and we might not get any sort of result that we're happy with. But if the system is broken, then you have to create a new system, and you're going to fail inevitably, and then you will try again. And hopefully, as time marches on, you find a system that works in a new way and keep going from there.
Michelle?
Well, as I was listening to you comment about not being about the money, but the capitalism, when it's a capitalist society, and trying to get folks to support you, I don't think it necessarily has to be cash, just spreading the word, spreading the vision, sharing what ideas. That alone could draw certain community members. They're solely drawn in by the idea, and having them drawn in then by the idea leads to the money coming in. Going back to my Onyx Theater, I have all older folks, I will say, one or two younger on our board, but you're right in that our boards need more diversity in culture, in age, in gender, in ability, because they bring in all these new ideas. And people often want to share new ideas. So,
I think something that's really important too is that when the room is more diverse, now your network is more diverse, and now when you're trying to think of, oh, who do I know who can do X? Now you know someone who can do that, and you don't have this network of this sort of insular group of people who don't have any hands out into different types of groups of people. I think that's an important thing too as well for all of us, is to think about, you know, who is in your network and how diverse is your personal network, so that when you do need those hands to help break down a set or to give some money, you know, can you do those different things? And if you look around and you see that your network is not diverse, then that's a question that you have to ask yourself and think about, what can I do to make more connections to more people? And I think that's really important, because there are people who want to expand and want to connect to other communities, but I've had many people come to me and say, I don't really know any people of color, or I don't really know, you know, and they will ask me for my resources, and I feel like that's a problem.
One hope, I'm sorry, yes, up there.
Sorry, Thembi's comment made me think of the Matt Damon comments that came out last week. Regarding the conversation with Effie Brown about diversity happening in casting, not necessarily on a higher level in production. And it made me wonder, when you do get into situations with people who may be open to the idea of diversity, how do you make sure that they don't become defensive with charges that maybe they're not being the most diverse? I hate to say that's coddling, but sometimes we have to coddle. So do you have ideas on how to make that happen?
Is that for general? No. Oh, okay. Okay.
Well, I mean, for me, I've been doing this experiment over the last few years of saying what I think more, and it's really scary because I think a lot of us don't really get the encouragement necessarily to say what we think, especially in the different spaces that we're in, and I think a lot of it is also about relationship building and trust. There's more that you can say, I think, and do sometimes when people can tell that you care or respect them, value them, and it kind of helps when there are hard moments. Sometimes, I mean, some people talk about, I remember having a really hard conversation with someone talking about where I noticed they're taking up a lot of space and being mean, and they also happen to be like one of the few white men in the room of a particular grouping of people I was working with. And I remember, like, he was just as scared as I was to talk about it, and that I think he really appreciated the fact that I was even engaging him in the conversation. But like, I felt like I needed to, for both of us, start off with what I did value and appreciate about what he contributes. And I think a lot of times, because we've all been so hurt around being criticized and something's wrong with you, like a lot of people have gotten those messages. So, no matter what where you fall in that spectrum of identities, it's always going to feel like, it's going to feel hard. So I think that's something that I've noticed that's worked better for me, is that being able to have a relationship with someone, or being able to talk to someone not just about what's hard, but about what's going well too. And then also not being the only person. Sometimes knowing who are your allies. you know, listening and seeing what is it that people are able to hear. Sometimes you have to make that gauge of like, what is it that I'm able and willing to say, you know, that isn't just like, it's okay to be angry and upset. There's plenty of reason for us to be, and figuring out what spaces for me that I need to just scream into a pillow and like really like talk something through with somebody before I kind of go and to someone else who doesn't necessarily have the space to kind of sit with me, you know, and say, okay, what is it that I need to say to them? What is it that they're able to hear, and gauge on that. But sometimes you have to say stuff that people aren't able or willing to hear. And so that's also, yeah, something to consider.
I want to throw in also the one little gleam of hope that I see in the theater community, which is not, I don't know, I'll just say it, is like the Fringe, the phenomenon of Fringe Festivals that are happening in cities around the country. And if you're not familiar with that, what that basically means is people who they don't necessarily have institutional theaters. There's a show they want to do. You know, somebody's got an idea for a play or for a performance, and they just do like a pop-up, you know, and then we have Fringe Festivals around here. And if you've been following the Fringe Festival in Washington, D.C., it's become huge. It's huge because there are a lot of people who have an idea for a performance that they'd like to do, and they're ready to do it. They don't want to have to go to a theater and say, would you produce this, or would you raise money, would you give me a grant so that I could do this? They get their, you know, their coffee can money and empty their pockets and stuff and say, okay, I got $3.99. And we're going to do this show in my garage, you know, and I think the younger generation, and you guys can respond to, those of you who are part of it, can respond to this also, finds that really attractive. I mean, I find it attractive. I just don't want to have to go into the alley and sit in somebody's garage to see it. But I love the idea of being independent like that and autonomous and not having to go begging to a foundation or to a theater to say, oh, will you please produce my play? Will you please let me direct it? Will you please let me be in your play? You know, I'm $45,000 in debt from getting my MFA. Could you please give me a job? You know, so that that rather than just say, okay, that's one way to do it. Another way to do it is just, here's a garage. Let's put a show up. You know, and I think in a way the development of the not-for-profit theater, which pretty much started in the 50s, and Zelda Fitchhandler, our Zelda, was one of the primary forces behind the evolution of the not-for-profit theater. But the way that it expanded and the way it became this kind of big, at this point, almost kind of monolithic entity of people, you know, the people who run the not-for-profits, you know, or like in this class by themselves, you know, and they talk to each other. If you go to there's a theater, what do you call it? Association. Theater Communications Group. It's like the association of the professional not-for-profit theaters. And in many ways, it's just a wonderful organization. And every year or so, there's a big conference. And one of the things that when I first started going to them, the first thing that I noticed was that the people in the big theaters only talk to each other. And, you know, and then the little theaters are running around behind them trying to get their attention. Will you talk to me? Will you talk to me? Will you listen? I've got this great idea. And, you know, and there isn't a lot of, at least there wasn't a lot of synergy there. Things have metamorphosed a little bit since then. But I'm saying that to say that I think the model of the not-for-profit theater that we have now has become inhospitable, there's the word, inhospitable to a lot of young creativity, of people who got something they knew they want to do, and partly in response to that is why I think this fringe phenomenon is starting to become bigger. That most cities, big cities now, have a fringe festival, at some point during the year. And it's, you know, it's people who you're never going to see at an arena stage or on a Kennedy Center stage, you know, but they've got great ideas, they want to do it, and they just get it together and they do it. And that gives me hope, except that I know that they won't make any money from it. And I wish that, you know, I wish that all of us could do the things that we love the most, things that make us feel the most ourselves, and be able to sustain our lives from doing that, you know, that kind of core work. And unfortunately, I think that that's not going to be the truth for 99.9% of us who still have to, you know, flip burgers or do something, you know, to be able to pay the rent. So that's a real cheery note. Sorry. There, but yes. Yes.
I'm just fascinated by what you say, not a theater person and a writer and artist, but I think that we as a society have become so celebrity focused that I think anybody of any talent who has no standing in the celebrity world is going to be ignored for the most part, or maybe through some fluke of discovery. But I despair that independent creativity and individual creativity can stand up to our obsession with celebrity.
With celebrity. Mm-hmm.
I actually think, in response to that, there is hope in the internet, outside of, for the celebrity culture, because beyond the theater, I can't remember who said the quote, that the internet is one of humanity's greatest exploits into anarchy, because that is an arena where anyone can say anything. So this is not necessarily theater related, but I think that that will help with the celebrity culture. I think that having this tool as the internet, and if we can use the internet to bring people to theaters, that will help as well.
Yeah.
It bucks against what is the status quo. For the simple fact that we wouldn't know about all of the atrocities that happened in this past year, everything that Black Lives Matter stands for, wouldn't have the force that it has without the internet.
Mm-hmm.
So I see hope in the arts community through the internet.
I also think there's a lot of hope in just the things that people are saying through, like, in videos. And I mean, I remember there's a comedian, Hari Kondabolu. He's this comedian. He was on David Letterman talking about racism. There are different comedians, there are different artists. Black Lives Matter. There are things and conversations that are being put forward. And I really agree with you, Thembi, around, like, there are conversations that are happening that weren't happening in the same ways before. Mm-hmm. And that is, like, so hopeful to me, because if you're not having the space to talk about it, then nothing can change. So I feel like there's a great a potential for even deeper and wider transformation because of the kinds of conversations that are being pushed forward. Mm-hmm. Saying, like, no, we need to talk about this.
And maybe the one way, I don't think there is going to be a the way, but one way of helping that grow, or just not even grow, but to help it flower, is to encourage more of these kind of smaller scale conversations. And it doesn't have to happen in a room with 500 seats. It could happen, you know, which I'm not claiming this, but exactly, but it's kind of what I was referring to, it's like the Fringe thing gives me hope, that people who have something that they want to say together, they get together and they find a place to do it and they make it happen without a theater, you know, and because it's important to them. They have something to say and they want to reach a particular audience, and they're willing to just do it independently, not to have a corporate sponsor or whatever. Yes. Well, that's something that isn't.
Them free of charge to make them familiar both with the theater in terms of performance, writing, putting it together, making sets. I think that that's certainly a start to grow theater.
Right. And that's something I'm encouraged by now, too, is to see the number of, at least in this community, of organizations that are going into schools with various kinds of theater and performance, and not just not only taking performances to them or bringing them to performances, but getting the kids to write. She's at Young Playwrights, which is a wonderful, wonderful organization. Getting the kids to write their own plays, and then showing them to them, mirroring back to them what they can do. That's a really wonderful gift.
Well, I think it helps them be agents in redefining what theater looks like. We seem to accept the fact that the world changes in so many other ways, but for whatever reason, it feels like in some areas, in theater included, I think it is so slow to change with the times, and that's just so odd. And I think young people are a big part of that, to definitely bring them to all types of theater, but to allow them to create paradigms that don't exist yet, and to give them the space to do that and be creative. When we talk about creativity on all levels, right? So to show them, here's the canon. It's important to know what's happened before, and now unlock the imagination of young people, and to show them that it's important to play all types of roles in the creating of theater. One of the things that I've come across in my parenting and in sort of working in schools is the idea that if you don't get the lead role in the play, then everything else is a consolation. Oh, I have to run crew. Oh, I have to do this or that. As opposed to a culture where we're showing young people that theater is collaborative and everybody in the room is important. The designers are important. The actors are important. The producers. Are you going to go out and get neighborhood businesses to support you? That's important, right? So it's about broadening what theater practitioners do. And I think young people are coming around. I'm really excited about what I see young people thinking about and talking about right now.
There's that row of young people, our next generation, they're sitting there. Yeah, we got time for maybe like one more question or comment, and then we're going to have to wrap up, I believe.
Yeah. I was going to say, as an aspiring writer, I like to write about stuff that I'm familiar with, that I know. And I completely agree that women of color need to be represented more in this industry. But how do you guys feel about people who aren't women of color telling the stories? Like, just to get the word out there.
Well, sometimes, depending on the story, it makes a difference. And like it might make a difference with Michelle, like how would you feel if a hearing person writes a play about a deaf community? I think it would be kind of a similar thing. Maybe how would you feel about that?
Well, I can give you an example. I worked with C. Haya, who wrote a play called the CA Lions Project in Atlanta. And she wrote a deaf female character because she just had this idea that she wanted a deaf female role based on a personal experience she had because she has a deaf cousin and she had a crush on a deaf guy. So she learned to sign when she was little because of that. But that experience stuck with her, and she decided to put it out on paper and write it into a story. And so there is a black deaf female. Now, for you telling stories of black women or women of color stories, it has to be the kind of experience that you may have seen. Maybe the female perspective, your mom, your sisters, your cousins, your aunts, your girlfriends. Something, sit down, have really good, long conversations with your mom and the female experience and kind of file away those experiences and incorporate them. And that's how you start sharing the story of women of color, is through your own experience. Yeah. Now, me personally, when Sahaya wrote that character about a deaf woman, I think what she was doing was helping present the opportunity for an audience to see a Black deaf woman live, because many people don't write about us. And so I think it was quite an honor for a hearing person to recognize me as a woman, as a Black woman, as a deaf Black woman, and our experiences being valuable. And so I think that's how you can share the story, show it how valuable it is.
Thank you. Yeah. It depends on the story, to be the story and the writing. You know, I'm also a playwright, and I write white characters, and I don't, you know, I feel like I write the character to be who I understand the character to be, and that I don't know if that would offend a white audience or not. But so, I feel kind of the same way about a white or a non-African American writer writing an African American character. It depends on what they create. If they've got a character who is true to what they need, what's in the story, and isn't killed within the first 5 minutes of the play or something, you know, then I was like, okay, it's a free country, you know. You can't have freedom of speech and not have freedom of speech at the same time.
Well, and I think also with, as Thembi and many others have said, theater is such a collaborative art, and beyond, you know, who wrote the play and what characters were written and, you know, who should be cast as those characters, it's who do you bring in to direct? Who do you bring in to do the lights, to run crew, to like who else are you bringing into the room, and how did their perspectives inform the story? And I mean, you know, we're doing there's this festival right now with over 50 world premieres, and world premieres are, new plays are a changing thing. And the people that you have in the room working on a world premiere are going to change that play, because they're giving it the first production. They're setting the bar. Maybe words might not change, but whatever set was designed will impact the piece, and making sure that there are numerous perspectives in the room working on a piece, I think, goes to that as well.
Great. So maybe that's the last comment there, but I think the kind of closing with the word perspective is fitting, that a lot of the responses to the issues that have come up, or the issues that you may think of, in the end boil down to perspective. You know, who are you? Who is the teller of the story? Who's the audience of the story? You know, what's the intent of the story? What's the perspective of the story? And that, I don't know, I just, maybe that's the seat of the whole issue. And it's just that it's become problematic. It's in such a way that we are now having to have festivals of women's plays, because finally we realize in this country, in the theater community, that the perspective of the female playwright is not always making it to the front of the line. Not that we're saying it's better than anybody else's, but we like a little parody, you know, or maybe same kind of proportion that we have as a gender. More of us. When we make up more of the theater audience too. I so recently saw some statistics, which I could never quote, but about the percentage of ticket buyers, especially to like the big shows, like Broadway shows and stuff, that are female. It's overwhelmingly female. Yeah. All right. Well, thank you so much for being here. I hope that maybe you leave with some new thoughts, and and have some conversations that go on.
I think I was going to do a short performance.
Yes.
Yeah.
And before we let you out of the room, however, we're going to give you one last gift, which is a little performance by Anu.
Cool.
Would you like us to get out of here?
Yeah, maybe we could go there. So I'm just going to do a short excerpt from a play that I wrote called Mina's Dream. It's right here. And I'll give you a little context for this short scene. So Mina is about 9. She has she's about to be caught grabbing fistfuls of medicine from this garbage bag because the pharmacist that she has come to see has thrown away all this medicine. And she went to this pharmacy drawing like a handmade prescription for the medicine that her mom can't afford but desperately needs. And the pharmacist had said, you know, I'm sorry, I can't help you. Throws away all this medicine, and Mina decides to sneak in and grab that medicine from the garbage bag. If it expires today, then I still have today. I still have today. And then I hear the pharmacist's voice, "Hey, what are you doing?" And that's when I start to run, holding the medicine tight in my fist, my arms pumping. I am running so fast that the earth begins to shake. I am running so fast that the ground begins to crumble. I am running so fast that smoke starts to rise and sparks start to fly. I am running so fast that I take flight. And my legs stretch out like God across the universe. And I am flying past stars and the moon. Woo! and I can almost see the end of the universe. Mommy, I'm home. And with that,
yes, thank you.